The Prophet ﷺ did not fall short in informing about many signs, many events that would occur before the Day of Judgment. And this is what is known as part of, some of, the ghaib that the prophets knew. Of course, only Allah knows all of the unseen matters that are to come in the future. Only Allah knows about them in general and in detail. Allah knows. But the prophets were informed also about some of the things, like the coming of the Dajjal. How would we know that a Dajjal is coming unless Prophet Muhammad taught us, عليه الصلاة والسلام. So, although the Prophet mentioned that the lands of Sham are blessed, he also mentioned trials and tribulations that would come for the lands of Sham and from the lands of Sham. He said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, إِذَا فَسَدَ أَهْلُ الشَّامِ فَلَا خَيْرَ فِيكُمْ. If the lands of Sham, as we mentioned, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, Lebanon, a part of Iraq, up to Balis, a part of Egypt, up to Arish, and a part of Turkey. If the lands of Sham become corrupt, well, let me word it a better way. When, he said, alayhi salatu wasalam, إِذَا فَسَدَ, يعني when it's going to happen. Which means he's been informed, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that the lands of Sham, there would be in the future, before the Day of Judgment, a time that would come in which these lands, there would be a lot of corruption within them. He said, if this happens, when this happens, then the blessings, al-barakah, in the rest of the world, in all of the world, would lessen. إِذَا فَسَدَ أَهْلُ الشَّامِ. So he praised Sham in the beginning, in some hadiths, but then he also said about something that's coming in the future. He said, إِذَا فَسَد, when that happens, that there becomes fasad, corruption, wrongdoing, injustice, sins, in Sham, فَلَا خَيْرَ فِيكُمْ, meaning that in all the world now, not just Sham, in all the world, the blessings will become less. And he mentioned many trials and tribulations that would come. He mentioned, alayhi salatu wasalam, that all of the world would contain some form of injustice. Those people who are well tuned in to learning religious knowledge, they don't have to be scholars, but those that are well tuned in to learning the religious knowledge would be able to identify, many of us, we'd be able to identify how much or to what extent, to what great, deep extent the injustice actually is. There's so many things that happen that are injustices, not in one place on the earth. So, it's important to mention that things for the Muslims, because the Prophet told us, alayhi salatu wasalam, will get very bad before they get better. So for the Muslims, when we see what's happening around the world, or in specific places even, how bad things are getting, then yes, it's horrific, but it's not a surprise to the Muslims. Because the Prophet told us, alayhi salatu wasalam, that X, Y, and Z would happen. Some of the things he mentioned in general, And some of the things specifically he mentioned, like look, he mentioned Sham. Sham contains lots of Muslims. There was a point in time where there were people in Sham, maybe some 50 or 60 years ago, even up until nowadays, where those that identified as Muslims, they would insult Allah. By way of habit, it became a habit for them, while understanding what they're saying, yes, they would insult Allah. And then they would stand for a dhuhr, or for example, go and give the adhan, or cook a meal for Eid. So this happened especially in Damascus. Especially when I say Sham, I mean the wider Sham, even though Sham nowadays, if it's said, what's understood is Damascus. So this happened and is still happening. So it comes as no surprise to us Muslims when we see these hardships. Yes, it hurts. Yes, it would make the heart of a Muslim tremble when one sees one's brother or one's sister, a youngster who is helpless, who is suffering. It is very difficult. But the Prophet was truthful, alayhi salatu wassalam. And as we go throughout the days, weeks, months, years, we see day by day, you tick off certain things that the Prophet mentioned, alayhi salatu wassalam, and you say, wow, yeah, that happened. Yes, that happened too. That happened too. That's happening too. That's happening too. And this, as well as being difficult, it also strengthens a person's iman. To see that Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, if there was a person, let's say, who claimed to be a prophet, and he prophesied that such and such thing is going to happen in the future, right? Then, because he's not a prophet, right? If he had picked, let's say, a specific place, this place will become very corrupt. Or this place, this will happen in it. Or that specific places, what are the chances of this person who is a liar, is actually a liar, what are the chances of those things coming true? They're very, 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 very little. That coincidentally they would come true. Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, he mentioned about 40 minor signs of the Day of Judgment. All of them have occurred except about 3. All of them. Things that would have been unheard of in the past, that he mentioned, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that would happen in the future, have happened. And for some of us, for a lot of us, it's become normalized, as though, yeah, this is something that we've grown up seeing, but 100 years ago you wouldn't have seen that. So Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam is truthful. He mentioned that there would be a lot of injustice on the earth, a lot, and that there would be a lessening of the knowledge that is between people. And the reason for that would be that the real scholars would die. Once he said, and look at how profound he is, in the sense that I mentioned to you, that he's a messenger of Allah. He had lived about 1,500 years ago, and he said this, and look at the situation today. Look at the world stage, if you will. One of his companions, radiyallahu anhu, asked him, or rather, the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wassalam, Ya Thawban, his name was Thawban, what will be the situation of the Muslims, or what will you do when you see that the people surround the Muslims and they pick at them, they stab at them, they take from them, just like you have one dish and the people come and each one of them takes some food from it. They would all take from it, as they will. So the companion said, Ali qillatin bina ya Rasulallah. Is it because there will be in the future a small amount of us? Ali qillatin bina ya Rasulallah. Is it because we're so small in number that we'll get pushed around by this nation and that nation and that nation? He said, La, not because you're small in number. So you look at it. Indonesia, 200 million Muslims. There are Muslims in India, in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan. You look at Morocco, you look at Mauritania, Libya, you look at Egypt, you look at Nigeria, you look at Al-Habasha, you look at Somalia. Think about all the millions, keep adding the millions up. You have Al-Hijaz, Saudi Arabia, Al-Yemen, Oman, the UAE. You have Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine. You keep going, you keep going, you keep going. Ali qillatin bina ya Rasulallah. Is it because we'll be small in number, O Messenger of Allah? He said, La. Adatukum yawma idhin kathir. He said, you in the future, you will have a large number. Who would say that except a prophet, right? Alayhi salatu wassalam. He said, Adatukum, your number, yawma idhin. On that day, when this happens, when this transpires, Adatukum yawma idhin kathir, kathir. It'll be a great number. What is it, a sixth of the world, they say now? 1 billion, 2 billion, however much it is now. So he said, no, it's not because you will be small in number. He said, rather it's because yusibukumul wahn. It's because you will be afflicted with al-wahan. So the companion said, وَمَا الْوَهَنُ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. And what is al-wahan? What is that? He said, alayhi salatu wassalam, part of what he said I mentioned. He said, حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا. He said, what will afflict you is having love for the world. Loving the world. That is what will afflict the people. He said that your example is like غُثَاءُ السَّيْلِ. That when the river comes and it's gushing down and it brings things with it. The droplets of water in the river, they're a large amount, aren't they? So many droplets that come, but they bring things with them. They bring logs, they bring leaves, things like that. He said, like this, the benefit that all of these Muslims will bring will be very little in those days. We know as Muslims, as lay people, this is not in the hands of the lay people. MashaAllahu ka. You imagine the map. If you know the map well, imagine it. Look at it. Look at how all the Muslims, how many they are. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. All of them, this is what gathers them. MashaAllah. So, the Prophet mentioned, alayhi salatu wassalam, that when there is great injustice on the earth, then the Imam of the Muslims, Al-Mahdi, will appear. And he said that he would appear suddenly. Suddenly. Sometimes we look at a situation and we say for some of the Muslims, it's got really bad now. For example, 2 years ago, or last year, or this year, we think, can it get any worse? Can it get any worse? Imagine yourself in an area where there are no lights, there is no gas, there is no electricity, there is no water. Could it get any worse? The Prophet ﷺ said that when it gets really bad, and remember, I'd like to remind you of something, the Prophets were sent to these central areas. So the Arabian Peninsula and Sham and in Egypt. So these areas, these are the areas that saw revelation, right? Australia, for example, didn't see revelation. North and South America didn't see revelation. There were no prophets there. No prophets were sent there. This is where the prophets were. Sham, remember, is where the day of judgment will take place. So, the Prophet ﷺ said that Al-Mahdi would come. And he told us that at that time there would be a lot of fighting would have broken out in the world. And the scholars mentioned that this person, this pious person who will come, he would appear in Mecca and so on. And then he would go where? You know where he goes? Bayt al-Maqdis. That's where he goes. Bayt al-Maqdis. And then that he would remain there for about 8 years, preparing. Not in secret, in the open, the people will know him for 8 years. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, وَالَّذِي نَفْسُ أَبِي الْقَاسِمِ بِيَدِهِ. He said, I swear by the one who the soul of Abu al-Qasim is in his control. Meaning, I swear by the Lord of Muhammad, swearing by Allah. لَيَنْزِلَنَّ فِيكُمُ الْمَسِيحُ ابْنُ مَرْيَمَ. That when the things reach a height, لَيَنْزِلَنَّ فِيكُمْ الْمَسِيحُ ابْنُ مَرْيَمَ, Eesaa ibn Maryam. Prophet Eesaa عليه السلام will descend in Damascus. And he described it, عليه الصلاة والسلام, how that would be. Then he mentioned at that time, at the same time, وَإِمَامُهُمْ رَجُلٌ صَالِحٌ, that their imam, the leader of the Muslims at that time, of all of the Muslims, would be a pious person, Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Mahdi. فَبَيْنَمَا إِمَامُهُمْ تَقَدَّمَ يُصَلِّي بِهِمُ الصُّبْحَ. And while their imam would be preparing to lead them in the Fajr prayer, إِذْ نَزَلَ عَلَيْهِمْ عِيسَى بْنُ مَرْيَمَ الصُّبْحَ. That at the time of Fajr, Eesaa alayhi salam would descend. You recall the Prophet Eesaa alayhi salam was not killed by the Yahud. إنما he was raised to the sky alayhi salam. ومن شأن الذي خلق من التراب أن يعود إليه. That the human being who was originally created, i.e. Adam alayhi salam, from the soil will return to it. Meaning that Eesaa alayhi salam will die on this earth, but he is still alive. So Eesaa alayhi salam, the Prophet said, would descend. فرجع ذلك الإمام ينكس يمشي القهقراء. When Eesaa alayhi salam comes from Damascus, which is in Syria, to Bayt al-Maqdis, which is in Palestine, when he comes, Al-Mahdi will see him and start to move back, because this is a messenger of Allah. So Prophet Eesaa alayhi salam, فَيَضَعُ عِيسَى يَدَهُ بَيْنَ كَتِفَيْهِ. Eesaa alayhi salam will put his hand, his blessed hand, between the shoulder blades of Al-Mahdi, like you do to someone who is coming backwards, like that, and will usher him forward. ثُمَّ يَقُولُ له, Eesaa alayhi salam will say to him, تَقَدَّمْ فَصَلِّ. Pray, lead us in prayer. فَإِنَّهَا لَكَ أُقِيمَتْ. For indeed when the Iqamah of Al-Fajr was said, you were set to be the Imam. So then he will lead them in prayer. فَإِذَا انصَرَفَ قَالَ عِيسَى عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ افتحوا الباب. Then when they are in the masjid, and it's thought that it is al-Masjid al-Aqsa, or another masjid in that area, Eesaa alayhi salam will say, open the door. And by this time, what's happened? Al-Mahdi has appeared. And who else has appeared other than Eesaa alayhi salam? Ad-Dajjal has already appeared. فيقول عيسى عليه السلام افتحوا الباب. Open the door. فيفتح وَوَرَاءَهُ الدَّجَّالُ وَمَعَهُ 70,000 يَهُودِيٌّ. That they would open the door and there would be a Dajjal. That's the first time that he would see Eesaa عليه السلام. And behind him, behind the Dajjal, with a Dajjal, there would be 70,000 people. كلهم ذو سيف. Each one of them has a sword. It is at this point that the Prophet told us, عليه الصلاة والسلام, that a lot of fighting would occur. A lot of fighting would occur. Then, Eesaa عليه السلام, after this fighting has occurred, and things settle down, the Prophet mentioned عليه الصلاة والسلام that Eesaa عليه السلام would come and he would wipe away the tears of the people. He would wipe away the tears of the people who've lost mothers, who've lost fathers, who've lost their whole families, who've lost limbs, who've lost their homes, their land. Eesaa alayhi salam would come and he would wipe the tears off their face, alayhi salam, giving them reassurance. So after a lot of difficult times, the Prophet told us, alayhi salatu wasalam, there would be good times that would come. But this comes with patience. So, the Prophet told us this, alayhi salatu wasalam, which means what? That it is something that Allah has eternally willed. It will happen. So what is upon the Muslim? To complain? No. To recognize this is the will of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. This is how it will happen. Prophets were murdered in the past. Some of the people of Bani Israel in the past, they would at dawn slaughter a prophet, and by al-dhuhr they were in the market buying and selling. They slaughtered many prophets. So for some people this is not something new. So it's upon the Muslims to persevere, to be patient, to make dua, because one already knows things are going to get bad. One already knows things are going to get worse. So, in the way that people can, by making dua, for example, by supplicating, this strengthens one's iman. By educating, this is something that's very, very important. If it had been in the past, can you imagine some of the leaders, Nuruddin al-Zanki, rahimahullah, Salahuddin, rahimahullah, others, who had it not been for all of this sophisticated and advanced technology and weaponry, let's say, in the past, the Muslims of those times, they would have got together and said, our Muslims in one area of the land are in pain. Let us go and rescue them. Because the Muslim heart, it's one heart, it beats together. The Prophet ﷺ said that the Muslims, all of them together, they are like one body. If one part of the body hurts, the rest of the body tries to aid it. A person enters into a fever state, which helps the body in the end. But they all go into this state. So this is something that we should all be aware of, that things before they get better, they will get worse. And not to be surprised at this, and to remain patient at this. That doesn't mean don't do anything. No, make dua, pray, educate yourself, educate others about how to pray. When the death of a person comes, let's say, then one will want to be in a good state. One will want to be in a state where they perform the obligations and they stayed away from the haram. One should not let emotion, mere emotion, come over them and then just act irrationally. The Prophet did not want that for the Muslims. عليه الصلاة والسلام. Something that I forgot to mention, subhanAllah, I mentioned it at the end. Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام mentioned, لا تشد الرحال إلا إلى ثلاثة مساجد. One, it's not recommended to travel to any masjid on the earth for the purpose of praying in it, seeking extra reward in it. It's not recommended to do that except for 3 masjids. Al-Masjid al-Haram, which is in Mecca, and Al-Masjid al-Nabawi, which is in, and Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, which is in Bayt al-Maqdis, Palestine. I think I said before, Bayt al-Muqaddas, it's Al-Bayt al-Muqaddas. Okay, Bayt al-Maqdis, Al-Bayt al-Muqaddas. So, the prayer, it is one prayer in Al-Masjid al-Haram, a person is rewarded for it, or it is, compared to one prayer anywhere else other than these 3 places, it is multiplied by 100,000 times. Praying one prayer in Makkah al-Mukarram, in Al-Masjid al-Haram. Imagine living there, Ya Allah. 100,000, 100,000 salah. Allahu Akbar. Then in Al-Masjid al-Nabawi, it is worth 1,000. One prayer is worth 1,000. And this is in the Masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, which is the old boundaries, the original boundaries that he set, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, not in the extensions. So you go through Khawkhat Abi Bakr and you stand near the Rawdah there. And also Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. This is a place where it's recommended to travel to pray there. And it's worth 500 prayers. But having said that, it's recommended to do that. It's not an obligation. Nowadays, there are more obligations that are not being fulfilled. So it is not the state of a wise person to leave what is an obligation and to strive for something that is sunnah. The Prophet does not want us to do that, alayhi salatu wassalam. Rather, he wants us to first fulfill the obligations as he ordered. Fulfill the obligations first. If all of the obligations are fulfilled, if the Islamically dire needs are all fulfilled, then yes, then do some of those recommended matters that you're not already doing daily. Yeah, of course, pray your sunnahs, fast your sunnah, fast. This, for example, traveling to a Masjid al-Aqsa just to pray there. We ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to free al-Masjid al-Aqsa from the bad situation that its people are in now, and to aid the Muslims all around the world. We ask Allah to grant us death upon al-Islam. Insha'Allah, before we finish, we're going to have a dua, insha'Allah, from Al-Ustadh Rayhan, insha'Allah ta'ala, and then we will finish. تفضل سيدي الكريم.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم إنا دعوناك فاستجب لنا دعاءنا. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم انصر المسلمين على قوم الكافرين يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم يا الله يا الله يا حي يا قيوم يا ذا الجلال والإكرام يا رب العالمين يا أرحم الراحمين، نسألك أن تلطف بأهلنا في فلسطين وفي غزة وفي كل بلاد يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم احفظهم، اللهم الطف بهم، اللهم احقن دماء المسلمين، اللهم سلمهم من كيد الكفار يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم اضرب الكافرين بالكافرين وأخرج المسلمين من بينهم سالمين يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم انصرهم على القوم الكافرين يا الله. اللهم سلمهم من كيد الصهاينة يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم يا الله يا الله، اللهم إنا دعوناك فاستجب لنا دعاءنا يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين في كل بلاد يا الله. اللهم اجمعنا بالشهداء في الجنة، اللهم اجمعنا بالشهداء في الجنة. اللهم حرر فلسطين، اللهم حرر فلسطين، اللهم حرر فلسطين، اللهم حرر المسجد الأقصى، اللهم حرر بيت المقدس، اللهم حرر غزة يا أرحم الراحمين. وصل الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين، وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم إنا دعوناك فاستجب دعاءنا بسر سورة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين، إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين، اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. لا إله إلا الله، لا إله إلا الله، لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.